Welcome, everyone. My name is Esther Lee, President of Chinese American Heritage Foundation. Today, our panel discussion topic is Next-Gen American Authors Celebrate Their Culture and Heritage. We are so excited to have two students, Kara Ng, who is a junior in high school in Chicago, who just wrote a book, Not Just a Simple Chinese Girl, and Ryan Doan-Nguyen, who studies at Harvard and loves to write poems. Kara is a new young author from Chicago's Bridgeport neighborhood. She is using her voice and the written word to share her Chinese American heritage. Her book was released in time for the celebration of Asian American and Pacific Islanders Heritage Month. She hopes to raise awareness and inspire others with her stories. Ryan Dongwan is an activist from Massachusetts who led protests around the Stop Asian Hate movement. He studies English and government at Harvard, where he serves as co-president of the Harvard Vietnamese Association and writes for the Harvard Crimson. Passionate about storytelling and uplifting the voices of marginalized groups, he has experience in journalism and poetry, but aspires to also break into the book writing industry. He is beyond excited to learn from the experienced authors in this panel. I would also like to introduce our moderator, Suzanne Park. She is a Korean-American writer who was born and raised in Tennessee. In her former life as a stand-up comedian, Suzanne appears on BET's Coming to the Stage, was the winner of the Seattle Sierra Miss Comedy Competition, and was a semi-finalist in NBC's Stand Up for Diversity showcase in San Francisco. Suzanne graduated from Columbia University and received an MBA degree from UCLA. She currently resides in Los Angeles with a husband, female offspring, and a sneaky rat that creeps around on her back patio. In her spare time, she procrastinates. Her novel has been featured in best of lists in NPR, Pop Sugar, Real Simple, Country Living, Bustle, BuzzFeed, Marie Claire, Parade, Shondaland, and Today's Show. So now, before we start our panel discussion, we would like to ask Kara to talk about her book briefly for 5 minutes, and then we'll have Ryan also share one of his poems for another 5 minutes as well. So without further ado, let me introduce Kara. Go ahead, Kara.
Okay. Thank you, Esther. So I'm so excited to meet you guys. I'm Kara, a junior in high school. This is my book, Not Just a Simple Chinese Girl. And I wrote it because I wanted to, like Esther said, I wanted to incorporate my Chinese American culture and some of my grandparents' history in it. I wrote it because I wanted to show what Chicago might look like on a day-to-day basis, but also what it was like a little bit in the past. So I referenced some of the racial tensions going on back then, but also a little bit about today. And so this book is about a Chinese American high schooler named Vanessa, where she and her family go through some struggles in the book. Not only did I write this book to talk about Chicago and Chicago's Chinatown here, but I also wanted to share a message, like the theme of the story. The message is about hope and redemption. So whether people reading it are young or old, I want them to know that what they might consider ugly in their past doesn't have to stay ugly and broken, because Vanessa, she has some guilt in her past. But later on, she finds redemption, which is a second chance, and it can be transformed into something beautiful and worthwhile. And she learns that she can move on and that she is renewed. So I also mentioned some landmarks in my book, like the Willis Tower here you can see, and Buckingham Fountain. But I also wanted to share some of I mentioned the local school in Chinatown called Haynes School. And I actually went to that school, Haynes School. They invited me to have a book talk. And I read part of the book to them that featured their school. And so I read about the small detail of a little hole in their gate, which was always there for so many years, and the kids would always just sneak in through the gate to go play in the park. So I read that part to them, And the kids were so happy and excited to hear their school was mentioned in my published book. And I think it just gave them a sense of pride and recognition, and they felt represented in the book. So I think Asian representation and also just representation of people in Chicago is very important. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kara. So let me now replace spotlight to Ryan.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Doan-Nguyen, and I'm a rising sophomore at Harvard studying English and government. Thank you so much for having me here. I just want to say, first of all, that I am so inspired by Kara and by Suzanne Park. Just seeing prominent Asian American authors and even author who is younger than I am really take initiative and go out into the world and introduce the story is just so inspiring. And deep down, I've always wanted to be a writer, but I don't really think I had the courage to do so. But just seeing people actually do that, like you guys, it's making me want to take more initiative myself and start writing more. So to share a bit about myself, I'll just start off by sharing a poem that I wrote, and I'll explain a little bit afterwards. So this poem is called English Broken with a question mark. At 5, eyes shut, confident hand on proud heart, like how the teachers taught us at school, I stand and recite America's pledge for Ba, not understanding what it means. Eyes sparkling of a brilliance witnessed only in celestial lights, he beams, takes me into his open arms, lifts me into the sultry air, and with a smile stretched from head to toe, says he's as proud as a father could be. But he reveals he's jealous, and my eyes fly open, my heart breaks. English, he tells me, flows from my mouth with the sophistication of a whispering river, the surface calm and poised, the bends at every right place. I have it tamed. He wants that. He says his owns a monsoon, choppy and wretchedly uneven, indigestible. His tongue can't wrap around the acidity of long vowels or the bitterness of consonants that tack themselves onto the ends of words. The sharp edges of Z's cut his delicate gums and he bleeds. English, he tells me, doesn't like him. In his mouth, it shatters and breaks. Jealous, huh? I had trouble believing that. To me, his accent was never lacking, but bursting with complicated flavor and vibrancy that rivaled Southeast Asia's most colorful. In his own captivating way, he reads English how an artist interprets nature, the stutters and pauses painting landscapes and weaving tapestries unlike any other. He garbles words, but makes them beautiful, unsystematic syllable emphases infusing his every saga with unmatched depth. It was me who has always been jealous. So I wondered, how at all is his English broken? At 19, a decade of experience behind me, I'm starting to understand. I don't think the brokenness lies in his English. I think it's riddled instead in our ignorance, our primitivity, unable to comprehend the beauties of the other, or in our quixotic standards and harsh words, shoved down throats like animal feed. Go back to where you came from. Speak English. We make others assimilate instead of acculturate, speak like we do instead of what's comfortable. Maybe what's broken has never even grazed the veneer of Ba's indoctrinated soul. Maybe what's broken has always been us. So this poem, I wrote it last year when I was 19, I'm 20 now. I was inspired by comments that my dad always made me. When I got into Harvard, whenever I got an award, he's always like, oh, you're doing so well because your English is amazing. And that kind of always made me a little bit sad because his English, I always thought it's just so fascinating and he has such a command of language. And I think that especially now we're seeing a lot of people being treated in horrible ways because of the way they speak English. We see it in the viral videos, in anti-Asian hate crimes. Oh, speak English, go back to China, go back to wherever you come from. But broken English to me is not broken. In fact, it's a sign of intelligence. The fact that they're able to command a whole language in addition to whatever they know of English is just fascinating. And so my poem tries to sort of challenge that notion and that stereotype. And it's an homage to my dad, who really inspires me in a lot of ways, as does the rest of my family. And yeah, that's a little bit about me. I love to write poems, and I'd love to start writing books too.
Okay, thank you. So let me have our moderator, Suzanne, join us, and you guys can start the panel discussion.
Well, thank you, Esther, for having us. I'm just pleased, completely just overwhelmed by happiness that I'm having this experience of speaking with Ryan and Kara today. So, you know, there's a lot of people watching. They want to hear about your stories. I'd love to just ask you both some questions. Some of them will be similar, and since your experiences are different, some will also be different. I'd love to start with you, Kara, first, to just chat about your book, Not Just a Simple Chinese Girl. I love the cover. Would you mind showing it again? Because
Yes.
it's a
So
gorgeous
this is
cover.
it.
I love it. So this story is set in modern day Chicago Chinatown, and it incorporates the experiences of Chinese American teens. So what inspired you to write this book? You mentioned about, you know, what you incorporated in the book and the messages you want people to take away, but I'd love to know what made you want to write it now.
Yeah. So I've always written books when I was a little girl. And I've read books too. Like I love reading Junie B. Jones, Roald Dahl books, and Ramona Quimby. But most of the books that I read were mainly Caucasian protagonists, and I never read anything in Chicago. I wanted to incorporate some of the settings in Chicago and hear about present day in Chicago. And I also wanted to share some multicultural aspects in my book, because during the pandemic, I was reading these books. She's my favorite author. She wrote these books about this Caucasian family living in small town Indiana. But I wanted to see more about different cultures. And so I want to share some of the books I wrote when I was little. They're all kind of multicultural, but this one is what I wrote when I was a little girl. I based it off of my American Girl doll. She's Italian, but so I just wrote this in Italy, about her being in Italy, and I have some stuff about, this is when I was like 7, so.
Is that based on the Pigeon books?
So I was
Pigeon writes the
inspired
book?
by, no, not this one, but I was inspired for this one about like Cinderella.
Oh,
This
okay.
one was like a Mexican Cinderella. This one, and this one, where is it? Yeah, this was about for China, so I wanted to incorporate the Chinese culture in it. And so I was just inspired. I was very creative when I was younger. I actually got inspired to write a book just based on the game Candyland. So I was like, oh, I can make a book about Candyland. So I was just inspired by all these different books I've read and just the imagination I had.
Gotcha. And so when you wrote this book, or any of your previous books when you were like 4 or 6, or what was your writing process like? Like, do you just sit down and write the entire book? Do you write pieces of it? Do you have inspiration of like book ideas and then come back to it? I'd love to know how you even get started and finish it up.
Yeah. So when I first started writing this book, the week before I started writing it, I had no idea what I was going to write about. All I knew was that I wanted to write about a girl living in Chicago. And so I just started jotting some things down, and I said a prayer, and it started coming to me. And so when I wrote it, I started from late August to October. That was when I just laid out everything for 30 chapters. And then in the month of November, I wrote the whole draft. So I did the NaNoWriMo website where you write for 30 days. And then I had the first draft, and then I just started editing the whole thing up till April. And then that's when I published it in May.
And did you know you wanted to publish it immediately? Like the other books, you kept on your desk or whatever. Like, how did you decide this was the book that you wanted as your first book?
Yeah, so if you asked me a year ago if I would be publishing a book, I'd say no way. So I wanted to publish this book because, well, I actually was going to take this class and it said, oh, you can publish it in a school year. I was like, oh, that's so cool. So I decided I would do this, and that's how it came to mind, because I knew that when I was younger I wanted to publish books, but I didn't know how, and I thought it was a long process, but like anyone can do it, and so I thought, why not?
That's amazing. And a question I don't think I've ever run by you is, how did you get the cover and in place and then publish the book? Like, how did the cover come about?
Yeah, so my mom's friend, she's an artist, and so we reached out to her, and I asked her. So I wanted to make the cover recognizable for people that live in Chicago, and they'll see the gate here. They'll be like, oh, this is Chicago Chinatown. They'll see the restaurants here, and you can also see the Willis Tower. So I had that in mind, and then I also wanted the protagonist. She's wearing a jade necklace here. You can't really see, but that's a key part to the story. So if you see.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to just have a cover. People say don't judge a book by its cover, but people judge a book by its cover. So I wanted people to pick up this book and see, oh, this is Chicago Chinatown. And so I had my mom's friend draw this, and then I actually self-published this on Amazon. And then that's when I uploaded it onto there, and then I submitted everything, and then it got published.
So that's very amazing to me, because I know there's a lot of people and authors who find that just self-publishing is very daunting because there's so many parts. There's the actual development of the book, the editing of, and getting it to a point where you're ready for publication, then bringing in the cover artists. And then after you release the book, as you know, then you have to promote the book or talk about the book at various events like this one. So it's amazing that you were able to do all of this as just being in high school. I just find that amazing. And congratulations on your book launch.
Yeah, thank you.
Ryan, I'd love to switch over to you to chat about your writing experience. I know that you are a writer. You write. So some people say, "Oh, I'm not a writer because I haven't published or something," but that doesn't mean, in my opinion, that is not the case. You are a writer. The poem you just shared was beautiful. And then I've read your bio, but also read a little bit about you through various previous awards. I know that your refugee parents fled Vietnam, and those anecdotes have had a huge impact on your life. And then you've written award-winning poems and created short films. And in college, you worked with professors on essays about the Asian diaspora. So as you continue your writing journey in college and after, do you see yourself continuing the poetry and essay writing, or do you see yourself writing something else, fiction, nonfiction, or just completely switching to something else?
Sure. I think in the past, I have always gravitated toward poems and journalism and the essay writing, the short form writing that I do, just because I love stories and like sort of biography. So I was really inspired by Humans of New York growing up. It's amazing the stories that Brandon is able to obtain from people. And so I was very obsessed with just having very long conversations with a bunch of people. And one of those is obviously my family. So just sitting down with my parents and my grandparents. The inspiration for the poem I shared earlier was a conversation I had with my dad, in which he shared with me that he started off as a gender in college, and he would have been a doctor. That's what he wanted to do, but his English skills held him back because he couldn't score high enough on an English exam. And so that just led me to think of all the barriers that people who supposedly speak broken English have in American society. And so just those little things have sort of condensed into smaller works, but I ultimately want to explore fiction writing and just more creative styles that I haven't explored in the past, just because I think that there's something valuable within book writing, within fiction writing that you can't find in other places. So I would love to learn more about book writing from both you and Kara.
You also are an activist, and I'm just curious to know, sometimes a form of activism is through writing, where you send across a message, whether it's couched in humor or in poetic language, but it is in the end supposed to have a takeaway where people see and expose something from a marginalized perspective. Do you see yourself incorporating activism in your writing in the future? Do you see it as being a prominent thing or something more subtle that you want to express through your prose and through your poems?
So I definitely want to include themes and messages that fall in line with my activism in my writing, whether that's subtle or more prominent depends, I believe, on the piece itself. So it depends. But I also think that both you and Kara are already activists in what you do. And by elevating the sort of Asian American voice and AAPI stories to the forefront of people's conscience. So I don't think activism necessarily needs to be in bold print. I think you can do it through art. You can do it through publishing a book about Chicago's Chinatown, or you can just do it by featuring two Asian American protagonists as the characters in a love story like you do. So I think activism takes a ton of ways, and I personally want to focus more on the story, and activism will come as a result of that.
And now this is sort of for both of you now, so let's have Kara go first on this one. Have you taken classes for writing or read books on writing or publishing to kind of help you go through your journey, Kara? And same for Ryan.
Yeah, so for I told you the younger books, or the books I wrote when I was a kid, that was done for school. So I did one for Easter, I did one for literature. So I just did that as a little girl in elementary school. And then for this published novel, I did it through a course, a homeschool course. And I told you the teacher said that it could be done in 9 months in a school year. So that you just had to come up with an idea, write, and it would go through different rounds of editing, and he would teach you how to do book trailers and upload it on Amazon, and that was just really cool. So that is the course that I took.
Gotcha. What about you, Ryan?
Apart from my English classes in high school, I've only really taken one creative writing course, and that was a class I took last semester. It was transformative because before that class, I had always seen writing as sort of just a hobby. It was something that I would do in between classes or after I got all of my other things out of the way. But now, because of that creative writing class, I was able to interact with real writers, real authors. My professor was a published writer, and see that you can actually make a life for yourself out of prose and out of words. And that was really beautiful to me. So it opened my eyes to a whole new world.
Amazing. For the both of you, I'd love to know what you're working on now, as far as, even if it's, something for class, but it would be nice to know what you're writing now or what you have in the short future, what you're working on. Kara, would you mind going first?
Yeah. So although I'm not currently writing any books now, I hope to do so in the future, maybe a prequel or sequel to this book. But right now I am working on more book talks like this webinar right now and marketing the book. And so I mentioned earlier that I went to Haines School and I did a book talk. So I'm going to various schools, elementary schools, and I'm sharing how they can share their story too. And they can use their failures and their accomplishments to tell a story. They don't have to be someone great and famous to tell a story and be successful. They can do it right now. So that's what I'm working on.
Excellent. How about you, Ryan?
So as a writer for The Crimson, which is Harvard's student newspaper, we're working on a Pride edition because this June month is Pride. And so I'm specifically writing a feature on the dissolution of Boston Pride and sort of the future of Pride in Boston now that we don't have a physical parade. So I've been talking to a lot of local leaders in the LGBTQ space here, and that has been so cool to learn about the history. I'm also working with a history professor at Harvard on an essay to be submitted to Johns Hopkins University Journal of Asian American Studies. We're looking at Southwest and SWANA, the split term, and how that plays a role. And I'm also just looking at YouTube videos for my future book. I don't really know how that's shaping up, but just having a lot of ideas, jotting them down, organizing sort of the conversations that I've had with my family and seeing what can come of this, what book ideas might be possible. So it's a very cloudy space, but it's in the works.
Actually, let's talk kind of practicality from a writing perspective, what you just mentioned of like how you collect ideas. How do you organize your ideas, or how do you jot your ideas down of things that you have as potential creative projects? It doesn't necessarily have to be writing, it could be film-based or whatever, but where do you take what's up here and then where do you put it and store it for future use?
Yes. So whenever I come across an idea or hear something in a conversation, just in public, I just pull out my notes app on my phone and jot it down. So
I do
that's
too.
I've done a lot of things. And then there was a point when that note exceeded the word availability. And so I just transferred all of that to a Google Doc, book ideas and just inspiration. So I have a running list of conversations that I've heard, conversations that I've had, biographies about people I find inspiring, and just quotes that I find inspiring.
That's great. And Kara, what about you? How do you kind of take your ideas and put them down for future use?
Yeah, it's similar to Ryan. Like when I hear people say something in conversations, or if I read something that strikes me, I'm like, oh no, I better write that down before I forget. Because sometimes I'm like, I'll remember it, but then I forget. I'm like, oh no. So I have to write it down, and I also do it based on my personal experiences. Like although it doesn't seem very significant to me, I can add a little twist to it, and then it makes it more exciting. For example, my grandma, in the book I mentioned my grandma's kitchen, my grandma's restaurant. She used to have a restaurant in Chinatown, and I would go over there and have smoothies after I came back from the beach. So I just added parts like that in there, or how Asian grandmas sometimes feed you a lot to show their love to you. So I added that part in there just for small stories and small moments in there. Yeah.
I do the same. I either use Notes app or I email it to myself if I'm really inspired, so that I can eventually put it in a Google Doc if I'm not ready to open that doc just yet. So yeah, it's all electronic now. I did have the Post-it note system that is not recommended. My desk was littered with them, ended up being confusing, but yeah, it's now electronic. My final question for both of you is who are your favorite authors, or authors who have inspired you to continue writing? I'd love to start with Kara this time.
Yeah. So as I told you, I love my favorite writers are Karen Kingsbury and Sharon Garland Brown, and also the childhood books that I read, like Ramona Quimby. I hope to write more children's books, children's chapters books in the future, because that's where you can start. That's where kids start reading books, loving books, and getting insight from there. So I want, so Karen Kingsbury and Sharon Garland Brown, because it gives so much inspiration, and it shares about the characters' struggles that they face. It shows all the flaws and imperfections, but it shows that it's beautiful. So yeah.
Gotcha. Ryan, how about you?
For me, I would say one of my favorite authors is Ocean Vuong. I love how he has a background as a poet, but is still able to write such beautiful novels. And he uses his experience as a poet to inform his sort of stylistic choices. And so I always find myself reading his works for inspiration. And he's also a Vietnamese American author, which also inspires me a ton. I also love Khaled Hosseini, who wrote The Kite Runner and A Thousand Splendid Suns. Just beautiful, beautiful writing and prose all around, as well as Jhumpa Lahiri's Interpreter of Melodies and also Anthony Doerr's All the Light We Cannot See. I've like annotated those books so many times over, just because like the way they are able to articulate feelings, emotions, and imagery is something that I really look up to and aspire to reach one day. So if you see one of those copies in my shelf, you'll see like a million sticky notes and page flags. They've been kind of destroyed, but that's how I improve upon myself.
Excellent. I haven't watched the series of Pachinko with Min Jin Lee, but that Min Jin Lee's writing to me is very inspiring because it is not, it's beautiful writing, but it's very accessible. And I find that very aspirational in terms of like reaching more people in a sort of commercial way, but also it's upmarket in its way of conveying messages. And so I feel like that's something that that it's a book that I keep going back to and rereading because it's just wonderful literature. Esther, I think that is the end of the panel section of the discussion.
Okay, so well, thank you so much for the panel discussion. It's very inspiring. So let me give the audience some time to put in some more questions. So meanwhile, I would like to get to a question to start out with Suzanne. You are actually right now like a big sister to these young writers. So could you share a little bit your insight or experience with your writing? Plus, are you still doing comedian or you doing both? Or why is the switching? Can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. I think so. My path to publication was a very windy path. So there is something to be said too about while we have young voices here today, I encourage marginalized, encourage and really want to promote marginalized voices of all ages. And so I know many people who kind of in our generation, my generation, that didn't see a lot of Asian American writers and stories, movies or films, anything really out there at that time. And so when I started my path to publication, I didn't really have a goal of being a novelist to write what I do now in mind. I didn't know authors could actually be someone like me, look like me, because I never saw Asian American stories out there. So now things have changed, luckily, and I just am loving that there's so many marginalized voices represented, and also not just Asian American stories of first generation, but there's also second generation, third generation. It's just lovely to see so much representation growing. So as you mentioned, I didn't start out sort of, thinking like I started out in stand-up. And the reason why I ended up there was because I actually had wanted to be a humor writer, but I didn't know how that would look or what that would be. So the first thing I did was Google humor writer, Korean American. And the first few hits were all this one woman, and she was a stand-up comic in New York City. And then I lived in New York City at the time. So I was like, hey, I'll just meet up with her and see like what she does when it comes to humor writing. So I had like coffee with her, and it turns out she was just doing stand-up comedy, and then her humor writing was actually just her jokes. So it was a little misleading, I will say. And so but what happened is that I watched her go on stage, and she had a short set. It was about her Korean American experience based in Seattle. And I had never seen anybody get on a stage other than a few comedians like Henry Cho, Margaret Cho. There's a bunch of comedians that were sort of on the rise, but she just told us stories that were so similar to mine. And then the crowd was really engaged. And it was the first time I'd seen somebody really, she was more of a storyteller rather than a, a joke, quick joke, punchline kind of person. And it was the first time I'd seen storytelling in a stage setting. And I was thinking, wait, I could totally do that. And so I ended up just in stand-up comedy for 10 years and didn't realize like I had gone down this path. I was invited to festivals. I was, I had started trying to tour a little bit, but then at some point I was thinking like 10 years later, wait, this wasn't my goal. My goal was not to do stand-up comedy. My goal was actually to write. And I'm so focused on the performance part that I'm not really writing as much. And it was then that I said to myself, okay, let me take some classes just to see what I needed to do. None of them were novel writing classes. I took memoirs, I took personal essays, I took screenwriting, and I basically took a bunch of classes of things that I ended up not wanting to do. So there's something to be said about that too. Like you might not nail the thing that you actually thought you wanted to do and realize actually you can now eliminate that as something you tried and it wasn't exactly for you. So I had gone down a different path. Again, I was doing stand-up, taking classes. I had gotten an MBA, had not taken any creative writing classes until I was taking them at NYU Extension and UCLA Extension, and some just other classes along the way. And got to a point where I'd written a collection of personal humorous essays, based on some authors that I had really enjoyed, specifically David Sedaris, who is just a wonderful, brilliant, dry humorist, and tried to get, try to get an literary agent with that collection. And what came back to me was the feedback of personal essays aren't selling as much anymore. And the only way you can really sell a collection is to be famous. So I figured, well, let me try to write something different because that's probably easier than being famous. And so I ended up kind of trying to explore a little bit more. And then one agent actually said to me, have you ever thought about taking some of these humorous essays and making them fiction? And it wasn't until she said that it clicked, that I was like, wait, I could just make up things and not only derive things from personal experience. As long as they're kind of realistic, at least the type of writing I do, it seems like it was something I wanted to try. And so that's how I ended up eventually writing a manuscript that was a humorous, a full-fledged book. And then I entered a mentorship program and was chosen to be mentored, and then ended up landing a literary agent. After that, my path to publication was also very bumpy, because still in 2016, people were saying, oh, we have one Asian American story. We already have a Korean American story. We can't take another one. And hearing stories saying like, we have enough, we have a cap, was hard to hear. And slowly the landscape started changing. And so in 2019 was the first time I was able to sell a manuscript. And it was nice after that because things just got a little bit easier. And it was just a matter of perseverance, being stubborn, and just sticking with it, that really kind of made a difference for my career.
Wow. It's wonderful. Yeah.
So you wrote 4 books?
So you wrote 4 books?
I've written 4 books. I think you could see the 4 vertical above me. And then this book, The Christmas Clash, is coming out in October. And that one is about 2 teenagers. One is Korean American, the main protagonist, and the love interest is a Chinese American. And they have 2 seasonal businesses at a mall. One works as a photographer in Santa's Village. The other one works at a virtual reality Santa extravaganza, like 3D thing. And so they end up finding out that the mall is going to close, and their parents both have food court businesses. One's a Korean restaurant, one's a Chinese restaurant. And then they find out that they have to work together to save the mall.
Okay. Do all your books related to a little bit on the comedy side, or not necessarily?
Yes, they all have comedy. I feel like that probably is the distinctive thing about what I do.
Okay.
And I think the stand-up 10 years of, being on stage and honing your craft, honing my voice really made a difference. So although my path wasn't straightforward to getting to the point of being published, all the things kind of leading up to that made a difference in creating my end product of the types of books that I write. And so being on stage and having quick feedback on whether your joke is working, like immediate silence or a lot of applause or, that sort of thing really helped me figure out how to convey humor through beats and timing and pausing at the right places. All those things matter. And in the end, it really helped me kind of find a distinctive voice with my writing.
Okay. So Kara and Ryan, do you guys have any question for Suzanne?
I actually have a few. One is, so you said that you had some experiences, but they don't exactly need to be true for you to make into your book. So what personal experience did you use to write that whole book or write those books?
The thing that's top of mind for me is my first book, my debut young adult book. It's about two teenagers who meet at a zombie escape room, and they find out that they both have a need for money, so they decide to enter a survivalist competition together that has a huge cash prize. So two teenagers battling it out in the elements in some weird forest in the Seattle area. Like, what could go wrong? So that whole experience was based on me being obsessed with The Walking Dead and watching every episode and reading every zombie or survivalist guide. For whatever reason, I was obsessed in this brief moment in time. And then also just escape rooms were also something that I had experienced recently. So those things kind of all converged to me thinking like this would be a pretty funny premise just a story idea, but what else can go wrong was where I just started making up things. I had to make sure they were technically possible because there is AI and things like that involved in this book. So that's what I mean by it's still grounded in reality, but it does have a little bit of elements that they're not so absurd that they're unbelievable, but they have to push the comfort zone of the person that's reading, where they're just like, this is a ride. I wanted it to be an entertaining journey.
Sounds cool. Can't wait to read it.
Yeah. So there was a question for Ryan. Ryan, do you still remember the poem that you read at the first Stop Asian Hate rally in Boston Common in March? Do you still remember the poem that you read? Someone wants you to share it again.
Oh, of course. Yes. I believe it was the poem called Nothing Less Than Heroic. And should I share it right now? Or?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. All right. So this is a poem I wrote in high school. I entered it into a competition, and it ended up being selected as one of the winners of the competition. So I'm super grateful. It's called Nothing Less Than Heroic. And it's a found poem that I created using 2 New York Times articles about refugees. They say I am only a 4-year-old, a refugee, but my parents said we are nothing less than heroic. For like Columbus, I can swim through international waters, through the sea, ocean, and endless waves. Like astronauts, I can smile and even sing through dark story, through threatening, perilous voyages. Like zombies of the world, I can rise through scars from working 12 to 14-hour days, through memories of being rejected, cast out, and shot. The world may proclaim I am only a refugee, but I know that we are nothing less than heroic.
Wow. Beautiful, short, but to the point. Really good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I actually did have a question for Miss Park about her experience writing, just
sure,
because it's knowledgeable. So how do you find, you're referencing using comedy to inform sort of the pauses in your writing. So how do you do that? How do you pay attention to the different aspects in your life and translate them into feel and fodder for your writing?
It's hard. I know some people are like, they want me to talk about or be on panels about how to be funny or how to write humor. And to me, it's so hard. It's like having the athlete that sort of has to train versus sort of like happens to be good at catching the ball just by, whatever. Since I was little, I've always been I don't want to say the class cut up, but I was not the most serious student. I mean, I got the grades, but it was sort of like just barely. It just has never been something that I had to kind of study. But what I ended up doing when I went like live on stage is see how other people reacted to it immediately. And so a lot of it is, the turn of phrase or the surprise ending that people aren't expecting. And those are the types of jokes I gravitate toward, especially because just my persona in general, when people stereotype, it's like an Asian female woman, you have all these stereotypes that run through your head. To have someone on stage and completely surprise you, I would always get the comment of like, oh, you were actually funny, or you're actually, surprisingly good, or something where it was just like a backhanded compliment. And, and it was surprising to me that there weren't there wasn't enough representation to kind of defy those stereotypes. And it was just me battling it, kind of an uphill battle. But as far as sort of figuring out how to incorporate that's comedy, when I write, I can hear how I would write it out, and like I could hear the voice of the character. And sometimes I get carried away, I'll be honest, where I'm just like down a path of writing jokes and it's clearly a bit, and I have to cut, my editor's like, you have to cut out 5 pages of you doing this monologue where I know you're angry at the guy that was racist at the coffee shop, but you gotta figure out how to rein that in. And so it isn't easy always either, because while I do like incorporating comedy, it's also to keep that balance, because what I do love to do in my writing is to couch tough situations with humor. And so people, hopefully, rather than have overt preaching, people take in the comedy and are a little bit more reflective about like why that's funny or why that's cringy, and then realize, oh, I kind of know what that is, like, because I see it now through this perspective that is humorous rather than something that's didactic.
That's really amazing. I love how you're using your unique experience as a comedian to inform that. And also, I think Kara's doing a little bit too. You said you used Candy Crush as inspiration. So being Gen Z and growing up in this technological age, you have these unique experiences that no one else in history has ever had before. So I definitely will push myself to pay attention to what I'm doing in life and use that as feel for my writing too. So thank you guys.
Yeah. I'd say it's in the small moments that you can make it into something big. Yeah. And then I have one more question for Suzanne. So your books are comedy, right? All of them are comedy. But do they have do all of them share a profound message, or are they each distinct?
They are distinct in that my young adult books touch usually on elements of racism, again, couched with humor. You see situations that the protagonist will go through that that might be kind of handled a little bit differently than somebody in the adult space. So my adult books focus usually on workplace comedies. So with those, I kind of tackle racism and sexism, because I put my protagonists in male-dominated workplaces that are heavily white male dominated. And so that kind of naturally things come to light that people might not see unless they hear it from my protagonist's perspective. One of the books I wrote was about the gaming industry, video games, and it's super toxic. Things are now coming out very publicly about what it's like to work in gaming and tech, where things are just really horrible for a lot of women out there, especially Asian women and marginalized people. And so by touching on that in a way using humor, I'm trying to tackle it a little bit differently than maybe other people would, hoping that new people can take away the message that this is not okay. The other thing that I'd like to do for both young adult and adult audiences is to showcase marginalized people having happily ever after endings, because I think there's a lot of emphasis on literature, Asian American literature and just Asian diaspora literature, to focus on trauma and cultural stress and intergenerational trauma. And while I do incorporate some of those things, again, also including racism and sexism, I do want to make sure that my characters have joy and they find happiness in things that are everyday, things that most people can experience, and make sure that they have that happy ending to show that they deserve love too.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a question for you, Ryan. Are all your poems have copyrights? Can we use your poem if we give you credit?
So that poem that I just read is published in the New York Times, but I'm sure you can use it if you give credit. I can drop the link in the chat. So
Okay. All right. I guess in general, if they like all your poems, but they technically, if they want to use it, they need to ask you, right? Because it's your poem.
I believe so. If you just say that, Ryan, it's completely fine by me.
Okay. All right. And one more is for Ryan. So did you because I didn't know about this. So possible for you to read the speech on anti-Asian hate on our seniors?
Oh, okay. Sure. So I
Is
think
that the poem you wrote? I mean, I haven't heard that one before.
it was just a speech. It wasn't
What's a speech? Oh,
yeah.
is it a long speech?
I can speak really fast if
Okay, all right, then share a little bit your speech with us.
sure. I'll just say a few paragraphs of it. Let me pull it up really quick. All right. So this was when I was 18 years old, and the pandemic was just starting. So this was in 2021. Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Doan-Nguyen. I'm an 18-year-old student at Harvard College, and as you know, one of the main organizers behind this event. As a Southeast Asian, I want to share my story and explain why I dreamed of making this happen. First of all, my roots and family mean so much to me in every way, and I wouldn't be where I am today without them. In my household, there are 21 South Vietnamese war refugees, boat people from the exodus of 1978. My 4 grandparents, my 7 uncles, my 8 aunts, and both my mom and dad. Because of that, I grew up on a diet of stories and have never been at a lack of inspiration. To me, their stories are bottomless wells of inspiration and courage. Every time I study an extra hour or sacrifice going out with friends, I summon the tenacity of Dad, who swam literal rivers to get to school, one hand battling the current and the other holding his books, education, high. I beat the anxiety of leading projects by unleashing the fearlessness of my grandmother, who organized an uprising of village women when their children were imprisoned for playing near a protest site. When peers complain about boredom, my mind soars to the ingenuity of my uncles, who braved monotonous months in refugee camp with makeshift box and plywood ping pong tables. And I encourage everyone to create our own game. So yeah, the people I'm surrounded by are amazing. And though they have such a distinct background, they still love this country and their American identity as much as everyone else. Growing up, they always told me the story that when they were in refugee camp, which is dangerous and run down, they chose to stay longer. Different countries would give them offers to live, Canada, Australia, France, etc., but they turned down every single one for days, weeks, months even. Why? Because they were holding out on America, the land of hope, of opportunity, of freedom, and of safety. They held out because America promised them peace. America promised them peace. And that's why it hurts. This idea for, I'll just skip a little bit. So I awoke to the story of Vicha Ratchanapakdi, an 84-year-old Thai American that was shoved to the ground and ultimately killed. I slammed my laptop shut right away with tears in my eyes because he looked just like my Amnoy, my grandfather. For the rest of the week, I couldn't sit still. My heart was aching and my hands curled into fists I didn't know what to do with. So it's a bit long, so I'm just gonna wrap it up. So this event is possible. I made this event, I organized it because I should not have to worry that my grandmother will be set on fire while putting out the trash. I should not have to worry that my grandpa will be slammed to the ground and killed on his morning walk. I should not have to worry that my uncle will come home from the subway one day slashed across the face. I should not have to worry, but here I am, worrying. That's why I want to do this. Because when it comes to making change and pursuing justice, the most dangerous thing is apathy, silence. If people stay silent in the face of hate, nothing will change. Asian Americans are 100% American, and we are not any less deserving of respect and peace. It's time we get people to realize that. So that was it. I'm sorry it took so long.
That's okay. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. Yeah. So there was a lot of compliments on the chat that you guys can also see, but I definitely want to read one out. Is the future of America is bright because amazing writers like Kara, Ryan, and Suzanne who are making us all proud of our family history and culture, which I totally agree. So thank you so much for joining us with this webinar. Suzanne, they say that you are a great moderator, which you are. And thank you, Kara and Ryan. I guess you guys are young, but we are very touched and inspired of what you guys are doing and planning to do for the future. And we are here to support you. I'm sure if you have any question, you can get in touch with Suzanne. She would love to be a big sister and help you guys out. And let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, so everybody want to thank you all for this webinar, and thank you for all the audience. And one last thing I just want to share as a closing, which we should be all very happy and proud of. Right now, as of today, or as of 2 days ago, 4 states in US to require public school children to study Asian American history. So we have Chicago, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. So I think there's such a good news, and would you guys continue to write books? We're starting to share the history, and you guys starting to, writing books for the future. That's how we lined up everything for the Asian American history and everything. So thank you so much, and good luck. Suzanne, can't wait to buy your books. And Kara, I got that. Oh, Zoom, right? Kind of not really showing your book, but I have your book. Oh, got it. I got your book. I just finished chapter 3. I'm a slow reader, so you can tell I cannot be a writer. But yeah, after I finish reading it, I'll share with you what I think about your book. But
okay,
so can't wait to buy Suzanne book. And Ryan, keep going. Keep going. Write your book, okay? I can't wait to buy your book when you publish one. You want to say something?
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say that Suzanne's books and Kara's book are next on my book list to read. So I'm really excited to read them and just keep on going. You guys inspire me so much, and I will take what I'm learning from you both to feel my own life. So keep it up, please. So much.
Yep. Everybody keep it up your good work. So thank you again. So looking forward to maybe have another webinar with you guys when you guys have more new books coming up. Okay.
Sounds
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having us.
Yep.
Bye, Kara. Bye, Ryan.
Bye. Take care, everyone.
Bye, Suzanne. Bye, Ryan. Bye, Esther.
Bye.